Hey there, Intelligent Automation community. So, if you remember in the last video, I had mentioned that I was trying to build what would have squarely fell into a personal automation, citizen development type of process, and ran into a few issues, and employed my buddy Kevin Wilson to help bail me out and work through a few design decisions. So I'm picking up Kevin for lunch, and I figured maybe we can share a little bit about what he was able to step in and help me with, some of the topics around citizen developer programs that maybe you want to employ. So let's maybe hear from Kevin. Hey, come on.
Hey Josh, how you doing?
Hey, doing well, Kevin. Doing well. So, welcome. I think I'm embodying my inner Ian Barkin here with the the video from the car. So, if for anybody that hasn't already met Kevin before, Kevin was quite literally working on nuclear submarines before he came to work with me here. So, Kevin, a weird fact: how long can you guys go down in nuclear submarines before you gotta resurface?
Yeah, Josh, my longest patrol was 92 days, and it's not a matter of technology, but after a while we just run out of food, and we gotta come back and get more.
Well, so with that, let's get into the topic for today. So, to give everybody a little bit of context, basically, one of my buddies is an avid golfer, and I'm not so much. Good on the beer leagues, but avid golfer, and was running into a problem where he's trying to book tee times for their golf club for the upcoming week. And the problem is everybody at the golf club logs in at 7 a.m. on Monday mornings all at the same time and all tries to book tee times as fast as possible. And, well, he was describing this use case to me, and I was like, well, I do have access to some RPA technology that can probably automate that type of scenario. So, Kevin, you want to walk us through what the actual automation was doing?
Yeah, Josh. Quite simply at a high level, we were logging into the website, right? We were navigating to where you book the tee times. We were updating the date, finding what tee times were open, and then we click reserve and reserve that particular tee time. Now, there's a little bit more nuance to it because, like you said, it's a big crowd trying to get those tee times. So sometimes you'd hit reserve and it would work. Sometimes it would say, no, not so much, not right now, because somebody else is trying to get that tee time. So that's essentially what the automation was all about.
Okay, so again, automation seemed fairly straightforward. I personally have access to, I think, 4 different RPA tools on my personal desktop, and so thought I might go into tackling this one. But again, unfortunately ran into some issues. So, Kevin, talk to us about some of the issues that you helped us resolve.
Yeah, Josh, for sure. The first one that we ran into, and it's fairly simple when you think about it, was the date picker, right? So it's easy enough for a person to see a mini calendar and pick the date, right? No big deal. But trying to get a digital worker to do that, a little bit difficult, right? Because the numbers are very tiny, they're spaced close together. So that was the first problem that we had to overcome, is how to actually put in the date I want to get a tee time for. So it sounds simple, but that was the first hurdle we had to overcome. So Josh, the next challenge we had was the table of open tee times was just very complex. From a developer perspective, it was a table but had so much complex data where you had tables within tables, tables within cells, rows within rows, very, very complicated to show people that had already booked something, right? Who booked it, what time they booked it, etc. So it wasn't just a straight up table like you'd see in Excel, very complicated table. So that was another hurdle we had to overcome.
Well, in one of the things I regularly run into tables with all of the RPA technologies out there is the fact that a software robot isn't necessarily inherent with the logic that a human may have. So,
right.
For example, when we deal with tables, the analogy John Walden likes to use is looking for your car keys in the house. So, a human, if a human's looking for their car keys, once they find their car keys, they're not going to keep searching the rest of the house for the car keys. Well, a software robot, unless you tell it otherwise, is going to check the rest of the house to make sure it doesn't have a duplicate set of car keys somewhere before it moves on with its next task. And so there are little development tricks that you can put in place to apply that logic to tell it, okay, you found it, you don't need to keep checking, move on to the next task.
Yeah, that's absolutely right, Josh. And so many times I think we assume that everyone thinks in terms of how HTML tables are even built in the first place, right? But you can't expect everyone to have built really complicated HTML tables. But as a developer in Blue Prism, I understand what's kind of behind the scenes, and that helped me to overcome that task.
Exactly. Okay, so now if we run into issues on those earlier stages, I would think that has a lot of downstream impact as well. So let's take, for example, you're trying to automate a spreadsheet. If you accidentally enter an extra keystroke and meant to enter data into column B instead of column C, and then you enter data into 100 rows accidentally in column C, well, all of a sudden that might cause quite a few issues to how your automation works, how future steps in the automation works, and in a really worst case scenario, if you're talking about a business context versus a personal automation, that could kind of wreak havoc to the whole rest of the organization. I mean, if we entered, invoices with an extra zero or a missing zero 1,000 extra times, that seems like a big problem. And that comes down to the crux of where RPA comes to play, similar to scripts and macros historically. They can be a huge force multiplier to allow an individual to automate a lot of work and input a lot of work, but if not done correctly, it also means they can automate a lot of bad work and cause a lot of trouble for the organizations because, we've never seen that type of thing before. Yeah, so also this is one of the reasons that I tend to advocate some level of central design control, even when you're talking about a fairly federated citizen developer model that's out there. Really practical build training is going to be key to the success of any organization. And part of the problem with practical build training is it's not how RPA vendors can possibly build standard repeatable training. I mean, if I'm building out a training course, I need thousands of people taking that course to be able to do the exact same thing on the exact same target applications. So, unfortunately, those perfect world applications that I built my training around are not necessarily what we always find in the real world. And so, Kevin, for the 3 people that are hopefully watching this at this point, you come into the organization and you train a lot of Blue Prism's subject matter experts or particular solution engineers, and many of them have some level of a technical background,
Absolutely.
but aren't necessarily IT coding types of background folks.
Correct.
So if you're thinking about training individuals both internally within the company and maybe citizen developers out there, what sort of training would you prescribe that would be practical application for individuals?
Yeah, Josh, that's a great question. Primarily, there's 2 things that have to happen. They have to learn the software. They have to learn how the RPA tool works. And that's not always an easy task, right? For people that are used to things like spreadsheet or Microsoft Word, even Excel, there's only so much I know about Excel, and there's a lot of things behind the scenes we never touch. So for the training, first off, they need to learn the tool itself, which may take weeks or months depending on what other tools they've played with. Do they have any technical experience in programming at all? Secondly, they must have some practical experience. In other words, if they've never really built anything from the ground up that took things like loops, iterations, etc., it may not come that intuitively to them. That's all. So Josh, the one thing I want to talk about is where is the real power in a tool like an RPA tool? The power is reusability. What do I mean by that? If there is a piece of logic I can use over and over and over, I have to have the ability in my mind to say, yes, I think logging in is reusable. Navigating to a particular point inside that website is reusable so that other people can leverage that. We really want to accelerate that speed of development. And most business people probably think of their job as, yes, I submit invoices, yes, I onboard people, etc. But they're not thinking about blocks of logic and how that can be reused, which is really the whole point in RPA is to get that acceleration of development. And that's what we're trying to do.
Well, clearly, if I want to have a RPA software robot help me to file expense reports, if somebody else has built the login to Concur, I shouldn't have to go and build that myself.
Absolutely.
I should reuse something that they've already built that hopefully has been hardened and trusted to work over and over again. So no reason to duplicate work across the organization.
That's absolutely right. And again, most business people I've worked with, unless they're from an IT type background somewhere in their past, they're just not going to think about those blocks of logic that they do every day that's reusable. So that's the real challenge they have, I think, in becoming really efficient with tools like RPA. So as we talk about the training that a citizen developer would need, Josh, we start them off in what we call foundation. Now, what is that? That's like playing a little bit of putt-putt golf, right? There's guardrails, you can only go so wrong, and everything's sort of geared so that they don't have problems. Everything just works exactly like it is in a book, and there's no challenges. But as you and I know with golf, if you get on a really challenging golf course with a lot of water, you better bring a lot of balls unless you're really, really good, right? And hence the same challenge with RPA development. If a person is from the HR discipline or accounting, they're just not going to think of the little nuances that really build the resiliency into the automation.
Well, it's like a golf game. You don't just want to go to the driving range. That's not really going to help you get around the course. You might get off the tee box really good, but you need to go practice the chipping. You need to go do those abstract scenarios and toss things out in weird scenarios that aren't the perfect, beautiful case that's out there.
That's absolutely correct. So, Josh, what really helped me with my training is not only was I going through the foundation training and studying for a developer, etc., but it was doing real world builds. Why? Because you just hit scenarios that you haven't seen before. It makes you go deeper into the help documentation. You'll ask people that have been doing it longer, and the answer is there. But in the training materials, again, it's more like, hello world, everything's fine. I'm never going to have a problem. The sun's always going to come up at the same time every day. But as we know, if you're dealing with a real world site, there could be little nuances in there that just trip you up. And again, I think that having IT developer experience helps. But anybody can learn this. It's not like it's impossible, but again, those challenges are going to come up, I think, more often for what we call citizen developers that haven't been in IT very long. So, Josh, for me, what was really interesting about this automation is after I had it basically designed, thought I had everything fine, the one thing I didn't consider, again, about the website is, as you mentioned earlier, at 7 a.m., the corral doors open and everybody's in there. So the performance time of the site just dropped horribly, where I thought I had my wait times set up for like 5 seconds for certain pieces. Now it was a minute and a half, because everybody was beating that site to death. So that's what I really had to learn is, the reality is I had the site, but now how are people really using it, right? What is their performance, etc., and consider all that at the same time and get that into the design.
Well, and God forbid the scenario where, Sunday afternoon when you're building automation, SharePoint works perfectly fine, and then all of a few people are logged into it on Wednesday afternoon, and the whole thing comes to a crawl, and now you have to work in things like intelligent wait stages and things like that into it. Okay, so there's no way to talk about the topic of citizen developers without getting into the feature function request that I see every time around record and replay functionality. This has historically been marketed by RPA vendors as a quick and easy way to record and auto-magically build an automation for you, which anybody that uses any of this stuff in a real-world environment will tell you that that's not really how it works. But that doesn't mean there's not a great functionality and use for recorders within an RPA ecosystem. So, Kevin, maybe you can pick up on that point. Where are recorders useful in this scenario?
Yeah, Josh. Again, being an RPA developer, my focus is on the technology. What are the technical hurdles, etc.? But I don't know how they process invoices, right? I don't know the business flow. I don't know how to onboard contractors. So the value of recording for me is phenomenal, because since I don't know the business process, I haven't worked in that company, right? It lets me know that, this is kind of how the business logic works. I have to log in, I have to navigate here, I have to submit my invoice, my resumes, etc., and then I go over here and I do something else. That way, I understand the framework of the business logic without tying up that SME's time for 2 or 3 days in a row. At least I understand the high level. What are we trying to do business-wise? What are the business steps? And that helps me a tremendous amount.
Well, exactly, and that goes into recording how SME is moving through their process for documentation.
Absolutely.
It also goes into helping to build out the skeleton or the wireframe or whatever word you want to use for the framework for the automation to begin with. Doesn't mean it's building the whole thing end to end for you, but it means it's a starting point. It's a layout. It's the structure that we can start with.
Absolutely right. I tell a lot of people it's kind of like a house. If you tell me you want a new house, that's interesting, but I don't know if you want a pool. Do you want it to be 3 levels? Do you want an elevator, etc.? But knowing those high-level details helps me frame the house out about like what you want it, and then we'll kind of to get to the details later, right?
Yeah, so you mentioned the power of a subject matter expert in all of this, and particularly somebody that understands the target application that you're looking to automate. So a couple of years ago, I was involved with a POC where we needed to, as a first step, log into a target application. And there was some nuance about that login screen that we were trying and cutting and pasting passwords into this screen, and it gives you all the blurred out passwords, so you can't actually see the characters. And I think it was 3 hours we were having problems trying to get into this screen. And just somebody that happens to work with that system day to day came over and said, "Well, guys, when you try and paste something in, it removes all the special characters." So we the whole time had been trying to plug in a password with special characters, and all the uppercase characters were removed in the password. All exclamation points and everything were removed in there. And just the aha moment when that happened, and we realized, kind of like you were mentioning at the very beginning, global key sends, going and manually doing the Shift I, Shift T, adding in those characters one by one versus a cut and paste, solved the whole thing within like 3 minutes for us. So yeah, maybe you can talk about that, and those situations will add up over time.
Yeah, you're right, Josh. And this is where I feel for people, again, there haven't been IT developers, right? It sounds so simple. Well, I need to put this string of characters, into my password field. Well, there's JavaScript back there that's sensing what's there, that's trying to filter it, maybe taking things out that have been cut and pasted. How in the world would a citizen developer know about that? But that's where if we team up a business SME, right, with a person like myself, who's an RPA developer, you can move really quickly through that build and get all that input, all that knowledge, all that historical information from the SME and get that into the design. And after all, isn't that the real goal? To capture their knowledge.
Yeah, the real go. Let's get work outcomes. Let's help people automate this stuff and move through their day-to-day job versus their day job becoming all of a sudden that they're doing nothing other than automating. So yeah.
So Josh, the real key and value again of a tool like an RPA tool is to be able to scale up your development, right? If it takes me 3 days to deliver something, and then 6 months down the road I can deliver that in 3 hours, I've done a whole lot of good. Now, how did that happen? Did I get a whole lot smarter? Well, maybe a little bit, but I'm building these reusable Lego blocks. So after I teach a digital worker how to log in one time, I should never, ever have to touch that again, or update a date field, or enter a password, or navigate somewhere in the site. So now I can have other developers reuse those Lego blocks and really start to see my development time come down more and more and more, which is more and more valuable to that company. So the real value, again, for me, is allowing a citizen developer, if you will, to help that acceleration curve go steeper and steeper.
Well, Kevin, thanks a ton for sharing with everybody on probably what needs to be the first of a lot of videos on the citizen development topic, and being my first guinea pig here in the mobile car studio lab here. We are not going to have sing-alongs starting here, but maybe my wife will work on that. So anyway, well, I usually sign us off. Why don't you do that this week?
Yeah, Josh, I appreciate it. It was a great topic. I hope folks are interested in it, and certainly for me, the value of talking about what a citizen developer can add to that staff and to those development values is just off the chain. So I've really enjoyed talking with you. And who says there's no free lunch? I'll do anything for lunch.
Here we go. Close this out.
Thank you.
Hey there, everybody. One more thing. I want to give a big shout out to Dave Morris, also known on YouTube as Dave the RPA Guy. Dave just graduated with his bachelor's in information technology from the American Military Institute. If you haven't already seen Dave's videos, they're great. Ideally, I'll share some of those right here. If that's not working on YouTube, I'll get those down in the first links below. Thanks a ton.